in studio, Morgan Harper, congressional candidate for Ohio's 3rd District. We've spoken before, it's great to have you here.
Great to be here, thanks for having me.
Very excited to find out how the campaign is going, and we were talking before the interview started, and it's getting down to the line, actually.
Yeah, we are under 100-day mark, so I think we have 95 days left in the campaign. It is crunch time, so we're just trying to get all the resources together, continue to get the word out throughout the 3rd District, but feeling great about how things are going.
And a lot of these races that I've been profiling are big fields. Sometimes you have an incumbent, but generally you have a lot of challengers. Yours is a more focused sort of race.
Yeah, so right now it's just me and the incumbent in the race. We actually submitted our signatures for the petition to get on the ballot this week, and we're waiting to hear back about that, but it looks like it'll probably be just the two of us.
Okay, and what about involvement from the party in terms of behind the scenes? Do they appear to have a favorite? Are we expecting that there's gonna be some sort of endorsement?
I think when your husband's on the executive committee of the party, then there probably is a favorite, which is the case for my incumbent. I actually released a petition, the campaign released a petition asking that the party not endorse in this race, that we have 2 credible candidates. We know that to be true based on fundraising, which tends to be the marker of viability for a campaign. We outraised my opponent by $100,000 in the last quarter with no PAC money, yeah. And so let the voters decide. Let's use the resources of the party to educate voters about their choices, host debates instead of picking early favorites and manipulating people through mailers and TV ads that only feature one endorsed candidate.
These are from the party?
Oh yes, yeah.
Oh, that seems inappropriate.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
Okay.
And it's not, yeah, I mean, it really puts challengers like me at a disadvantage who already have more limited resources, but also are just trying to really educate the electorate about some policy ideas, things that will, I don't know, enable people to get healthcare, housing, doing something about the climate crisis, and to obfuscate information and not spend that just letting people know about their choices doesn't make sense to me as a goal for the party.
So you implied no PAC money. So let's drill down. Your philosophy, where you're getting your money from, who are some of the big supporters financially of your opponent?
Of my opponent? So she takes 80% corporate PAC money, not a lot of 3% small dollar donors.
Wow.
And yeah, and like I said, we didn't take any corporate PAC money. Huge difference, right? And we know what these differences mean. It means that I am able to represent the interests of people, of individuals, that I will be unbought and unbossed in Congress and able to actually fight for what the constituents of the 3rd Congressional District need. And so that's what's most important to me. Also that we got donations from 90% of the zip codes that make up the 3rd District. Wow. Really shows that progressive policies can win in the Midwest, but we need candidates that are going to get directly to people to educate them about these types of policies and build an electorate that will support legislation and candidates who are gonna fight for it.
Okay, so obviously very clear difference between you and the candidate and how you're raising your money. Let's talk about your platform. What are some of the biggest policy distinctions between what you're running on, what your opponent's running on?
So I'm running on a platform that supports things like the Green New Deal, Medicare for All. My opponent, though she is technically a co-sponsor of Medicare for All, when actually for the first time acknowledged that this race was even happening when interviewed by the New York Times, seemed to have forgotten that and suggesting that I'm giving people pipe dreams of what's possible with some of these fantasy legislation. And it's like, well, you co-sponsored Medicare for All, right? So how much?
Apparently we're very serious about it.
Right, yeah, don't even really recall it. So yeah, so that's a big thing for me. I think everyone in this country should have healthcare. I'm also pushing for an ambitious housing agenda, building more housing, then also stabilizing rents, because we now have a majority of people who are renting in the area that I'm trying to represent, and we have absolutely no control over housing prices. In addition to pushing for things like universal child care and systemic reparations. One of the greatest injustices that have been committed in this country is the prevention of wealth building for Black people living here. And we as a progressive movement also need to be talking about that.
And okay, well in that area, what are some of the things you'd like to see done?
Well, I'm calling it systemic reparations because I do think that we can think boldly, right? We actually had a conversation this week that we were part of in Columbus, and there are ideas that people have. Should there be capital infusions for people who want to start businesses? That there shouldn't, that we're waiving property taxes for long-term homeowners and formerly redline communities. Home ownership is the primary way that people do build wealth in the US, as we know, and there's a lot that the federal government has done to prevent that opportunity from being available to the Black community, and that has to be remedied.
Do you support something like, I mean, there's a couple different ideas of how some sort of wealth tax could be put in that would help to lower inequality, particularly if the money was then used in ways that would benefit working class people, middle class people, something like that?
Yeah, I think for sure the income inequality and also wealth inequality is having a devastating impact on us as a country. And even if you find yourself on the other side of that with more money, it's not that comfortable to see people in your community that are sleeping in tents, for example, which is the situation that we have in the 3rd District. And so a lot of my policies are making sure that everyone gets a fair shot. And in order to do that, we have to, at a minimum, have people's basic needs met through healthcare, jobs that pay enough to live, just one job, and also doing something about the environment.
So some of the policies that you were talking about earlier, Medicare for All, Green New Deal, we know from polling these are very popular, not just amongst Democrats. Particularly for Medicare for All, though, it seemed like in the Democratic primary and in some of the debates that were going on, there was this the moderators were constantly going back to how much it's going to cost. And some of the candidates who on the stage have something like Medicare for All, they say that they support something like Medicare for All, they very much focus on the cost. It has felt like that is an attempt to dissuade people from any interest in the idea whatsoever. So as you're communicating around Medicare for All, how are you explaining the costs, the relative benefits, those sorts of things?
Yeah, it's funny, it comes up all the time. How are you gonna pay for it? How are you gonna pay for it? When we never ask that question, when, for example, this week we're authorizing increased war spending, defense budget for wars that go on and on and on, and that are just traumatizing a generation of young people, but not bringing any benefit to anyone, right? When we bail out corporations, when we give corporate tax cuts, there's no conversation about how are we gonna pay for it? Where's this money coming from? It's like, no, as soon as you start talking about money for people, for us, for our communities, then it's a referendum on responsible spending. We have to completely cut through this narrative. I do that in the 3rd District every day by reminding people that we as a country decide on our priorities and fund them. And it's time we start focusing on the priority of people and communities instead of just companies and war. And
so I think there were 43 Democrats who voted against the National Defense Authorization Act. Do you think you would have been the 44th if you were in office right now?
Yes.
You would have stood with like Ro Khanna and all that?
Yes.
Okay, we could use more people like that. So you also mentioned the Green New Deal. It was pretty big news, kind of superficial, but the Time gave the Person of the Year award to Greta Thunberg for her international advocacy. Do you feel like the time is now? Like if we get a progressive president, we get the right House, we can get this thing passed in the next couple of years?
Yeah, and we have to do something, right? So the time is now because we don't have a lot of time to waste. And so, I've been backing the Green New Deal since day one of this campaign. We just got endorsed by the Sunrise Movement.
Oh, congratulations!
Yesterday, yeah. So that's great because I've also pledged to not take any money from the fossil fuel industry. This is a no-brainer. This isn't a political issue. This isn't a partisan issue. This is just a issue of humanity. And are we going to address the fact that this planet will be uninhabitable for the next generation if we don't get to work in reducing carbon emissions?
Well, congrats on the endorsement. I know they're not ready to do an endorsement in the presidential race, but they have been doing scoring of people. They take, not just saying that you support the Green New Deal, but particularly what you're gonna do very seriously. I feel like support for the Green New Deal should be a litmus test for a candidate in a primary. Do you think that that's fair? That if you're on the wrong side of that issue, your positions on other issues perhaps are not that important?
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly one of the biggest issues of our time. And so I'm looking for every candidate to have a very, very strong idea. Green New Deal is the one that I'm backing, and we've got to have a plan here because it's our future. And we have 16-year-olds who are telling us that they're not having any faith in our leadership to do something about that. That's a wake-up call.
Yeah.
We've really got to address it.
So I know I don't want to get too ahead of you're in the primary. You got to get past the primary. But assuming that you become the candidate, you're running in the general election, there are these concerns going around in DC. Is impeachment going to dominate conversation during this election? Is it going to potentially hurt the Democrats? If it were up to you, what the general campaign that you're gonna be in, the many Democrats running, what would you like to be the focus of this general election? What do you think that the country should be focusing on in the run up to the 2020 election?
I think we need to be focusing on the fact that this economy is not working for at least 50% of the people living in this country, and we're seeing it in the 3rd District. And a lot of people, even if they can consider themselves to be fairly stable or on the other side of that economic equation, are more vulnerable than they realize, right? Through if one medical emergency comes up. And so that's what we spend a lot of time doing in campaigning with people in the 3rd District is sort of reprogramming things, because I think we have been brainwashed into thinking that this pull yourself up by the bootstraps narrative is reality, and it's not. For most of the people living in this country and in the 3rd district, it is a system built up for their failure, and we have to start getting the government focused on making sure that people are able to meet their basic needs through housing, healthcare, quality education, doing something about the environment, so folks really have a fair shot at building the life that they desire.
And I think, thankfully, all those issues that you've just listed there, I think that there's been a lot of great work by people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, Ilhan Omar, to get people to start to understand that those things are all connected.
Yeah.
And that solving one involves solving the others.
Yeah, and you have to take a grassroots approach to get there, right? And so, door to door, it's the door knocking, it's talking to people at community events, and that's what our campaign is about. And to have these types of races and candidates all over the country, I think particularly people from my generation that are willing to put that work in, get corporate money out of politics. And it's a lot of people, of all ages really though, that are waking up to the fact that this political system has failed us. How do we know? Because more and more of us are falling behind.
Where can people find out more about your platform?
So they can follow us on social media, MH4OH, and then also morganharper.org. Did I mention that it's our last full quarter of fundraising?
You might have.
It's our last full quarter of fundraising. So, really any resources that folks can chip in to support. I know it's the end of the year and the holidays, but it will for sure go to good use. We have a great team, and we just, are trying to execute our field game, and we're gonna get there and win this thing on March 17th, 2020.
Okay, Morgan Harper, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.